good stuff today, but I managed to forget a short piece that needs to get pasted on in last. Not that anybody's taking notes, but it needs to get pasted on your notes from last week. In 1831, the college had finished paying for the new college, what is now Cushing Hall. They hadn't finished building it, but they did have the money. So they switched their attention to building the president's house. And that was going to cost money, and they didn't have any, which is the sweet song that Hampden has been singing for 200 years. So what they did was the board said, okay, we have demolished all of the frame buildings that were in the original college. The only thing that's left is the old college, the 3-story brick building. And the grammar school is still meeting in there. So let's move the grammar school over to the new college and dismantle, not destroy, dismantle the old college and save the bricks. Okay? And they did. This makes more sense than you might think, because these are handmade bricks and they're relatively expensive. So they got maybe half the bricks. Time you count, throw away the ones that have too much mortar stuck to them and that you break and things. They got about half. And they carried them over and stacked them beside where Graham Hall, where the president's house was going to be. And they raised money. And in about 2 years, they started construction. And the new bricks that got unloaded were smaller than the old ones that were stacked up there from the 1775 building. Who knew the bricks had been getting smaller? So they thought about what to do, and they decided to put the old ones on the bottom and lay a circuit around and keep doing that, keep putting circuits around until it was clear that you did not have enough old brick left to do another pass. And then you stop and you put the new ones on, and the new ones are now about half an inch narrower than the old ones. And you either have to make it fit on the outside or fit on the inside, and the inside was going to be plastered. And so we'll make that work. So on top of the topmost tier of old brick is about a half-inch flange that goes all around the building. And if you look, this is the basement windows on the side away from the street. And if you look about one row of bricks above the top of the window, you may or may not be able to see a very slight change in color. Not much, and if you say there's none, I wouldn't argue with you, but that's where the old ones stop. And so they finished it off the new brick, and that was that. And I bring this up because I want to assign a homework problem for you. I promise not to do this, but you don't have to turn it in, okay? Sometime in the next 2 or 3 weeks, on a nice day, when you're over in the neighborhood of Graham anyway, get out on the street side, because the ground's a little higher there, it's easier. And walk straight up to the brick wall, all the way up till your belt buckle is touching it, okay? And reach up this way. And if you're about my size, and most of you are, your hand will be wrapping over this little half-inch flange. And if you then spend a couple seconds thinking about the fact that the heel of your hand is resting against a 250-year-old brick, which was part of the college's original educational construction, and your fingertips are touching the new shiny brick for the president's house, which is actually, let me think, 190 years old now. And you think about that for about 2 seconds, and then quick step away from the wall before somebody says, what on earth are you doing? But it's worth thinking about that time span. Now, let me go on to the real material for today. Cushing left.
Come on, walk. It changed.
Yeah, there we are. Cushing left in very poor health, obviously, in the spring of 1835. And they had somebody, this meant they needed to fill two jobs. They needed a president and they needed a chemist. And by this time, they had a pretty well established tradition of only using somebody with professional backgrounds to be the chemist. Not going to put a ordained clergyman in there again. And they had on the staff a young, flexible faculty member named George Dane, who had been helping Cushing in lab for a semester anyway. And they said, okay, Dane, you fill in and we'll go get a president first and then we'll get somebody to replace you. And he said, okay. And that worked all right. But then they had to get somebody. And this is where John William Draper enters the story. This is him. The slightly odd-looking picture is because it's a centerfold picture from an issue of Harper's Weekly, which was the big magazine in the United States in the 1850s. This is right, pretty much the end of the Civil War, and they have a double-page spread interview with him. He's important. What he is at that point is president of the NYU Med School, but he's well known internationally. But if you back up to, let's say, well, he's born in 1811, okay? His father is a Wesleyan clergyman, that is a Methodist. And the thing about the Methodists is that in those days, they moved the preacher every 6 years. I don't care how well you're getting along where you are, you're going to be someplace else and it's going to be a random draw. You don't get anything to say about it. So by the time he was 12, he had moved around several times over central England. And nobody was getting rich doing that. I tried to calculate out there was a pay scale for the Methodist ministers, and they seemed to have been getting about a third of what the faculty at Hampden-Sydney were getting, which was not very rewarding itself. But anyway, you were seriously not going to save your retirement in the Methodist ministry in England. And so fortunately, the family had a little bit of money, not a lot, not Downton Abbey, sit back and relax money, but enough money that they could count on sending the boy to college till he was smart. And it did look like he was smart. He'd gotten homeschooling until he was 11. And at that point, his father got moved to a new town, which had a good private school, which is a prep school in it. And they signed him up for that, and he aced it. This was more fun than anything. And so clearly he was college material. And they arranged to send him to the University of London, where they didn't have majors, but he took what would have been a chemistry major by just taking a chemistry course every time they let him. And he loved it. And he was good at it. He had good new ideas that people had not had before. And so when he got through, his instructor, Richard Turner, who was one of the leading chemists in England at the time, wrote him a reference letter saying he's been all the way through the chemistry sequence and he will do an excellent job teaching for you. But the reason he wrote that is that during Draper's junior or senior year, it doesn't matter, his father had died. And he's got a widow mother and 3 sisters, and he is going to have to put bacon on the table. So all of a sudden, it's very important that he get a paying job when he gets through with college. And he loves his chemistry stuff. So he asks Turner, can you recommend me any place to get on the faculty so I can do research and teach chemistry and so on? Because I think I could do this really well. And that's what I'd really like to do. And Turner said something equivalent to, no, son, England does not have any open faculty slots at this point, and it's not likely to for years. But you could go to the United States. They're building a new liberal arts college about every 50 miles, and they got to staff them with somebody. So I'm sure you can get on with one of the new colleges in the States. So in 1832, with his degree in hand, they take some more of the family savings and sail for the United States. I don't know what port they came into, but the next thing you hear about them is not much later. It's, it's still 1832, I think, maybe 1833. He is busy locating his mother and sisters in Chase City, Virginia. This is not an address that will spring naturally to your mind when you think about places to live in the United States. But Chase City is only about 7 or 8 miles from a place that he's pretty sure he can get a job, Randolph-Macon College, which then was in Boydton, which is only a few miles away. And Boydton had 0 population except for the college. Chase City, which is not very far away, at least has a town population. And what Draper thinks is that he can make a living for the family by setting up a girls' finishing school in Chase City and have his sisters run it, because they know polite behavior and things. And in fact, his older sister is an accomplished artist and so on, so that this could work. And they set that up. I think that's why they went Chase City in the first place. And he finally wipes his brow and goes down to Randolph-Macon and knocks on the dean's door and says, "You need a chemist and I'm your man." And the dean or the president said, "I'm sorry, we already filled that slot." Oh. So he thinks, I am going to be in the chemistry business. They're making enough money off the finishing school that if we cut things close, I can set up a lab in the house we're in and do chemical research and publish papers and get a resume that looks better when I send it to another school. Okay? And in 2 years, he publishes 8 papers. This is, even by the standards of the time, this is pretty good. And he thinks that's got to be enough, but it does not seem to be getting him anywhere. He's writing letters and nothing comes back. So he grinds his teeth off flat and says, okay, he needs an advanced degree. What he will do is go to the University of Pennsylvania Med School and get a 1-year MD degree. And that's an additional degree on top of his research publications, on top of his outstanding performance at London University. So he does that, gets through in 1835, and comes home and said, what's out there? And 1835 is right after the funeral for Cushing. Okay? So Hampden-Sydney is advertising by whatever mechanism schools used to advertise for faculty at that time. And here's this place that's from Chase City, this is like only 40 miles to get over there. So he comes over and says, I'm it. And what he didn't realize was the faculty was willing to take anything that didn't have a unicorn's horn as far. And they said, oh, good, you're on for the summer term. That'll be a trial term. And if you do well in that, we'll make you professor of chemistry and put you on the faculty full time. And he did a good job because he was smart and likable. And at the end of the fall term, they said, "You've done a great job. You're a professor of chemistry here." And so beginning in 1836, he's a professor of chemistry at Hampden-Sydney. But also beginning in 1836, he knows that pleasant as this is, it's not where he wants to do chemical research for a lifetime. You can't get chemicals here. So he sends a letter to NYU, which is about, NYU's in business as a university, but they're about to open a med school. And he bad wants to be a chemist at the med school. And they write him back and say, "Man, we'd really love to have you. You're just what we're looking for. But unfortunately," you can all say this together if you want to, "we don't have any money. And we'll get back to you just as soon as we have money enough to fund the position. And at that point, you're it." So before he has signed the contract to teach at Hampden-Sydney, he has committed himself to a contract at NYU, which is going to exist sometime, but not yet. Okay. You need another picture here. Okay. This is the first Hampden-Sydney faculty member we have a photograph of, because it's the first faculty member anywhere anybody has a photograph of. Unfortunately, it's not at Hampden-Sydney. He goes to NYU. They finally announce they have the money in 1839, and he says, "I'm out of here." And he shows up and immediately starts doing photographic research. But he is into this. He's been into this for 3 or 4 months now. And he gets somebody to take a picture of him, more or less the first week he's there. So this is early fall 1839. And a polite person would ask, "Where did he get those pajama pants?" I don't understand the fashion, men's fashions of 1839, but that's him. And he is wearing seriously weird clothes for professional business. Now, he's still teaching Hampden-Sydney. And so, yes, he's got this promise from NYU, which can't spend promises. So I need to back up a little bit. When Jefferson set up the University of Virginia, he was determined to have a med school with it. He was going to have 6 different schools, and one of them was going to be a medical school. And all of these were going to be in Charlottesville, which at the time had about 1,500 residents. And because he had high salaries for the faculty, he recruited pretty good people, including 2 very good doctors from Richmond, who abandoned their practice in Richmond, moved to Charlottesville because that's what he said you had to do. But they did have feelings that this was not going to work out well. If you're in a town of 1,500 and you have multiple doctors there, you're not going to have terrible spreads of disease that make hundreds of people sick at one time, because there aren't hundreds of people. And there's no industry, so nobody's going to get his thumb sawed off in the sawmill. There aren't going to be any serious injuries that call for surgery. They don't know anything about pharmacology, of course, but there's nothing you can treat anybody for. And so Jefferson has set it up so that the pay for the doctors is what they make from their practice, plus a slight supplement to get up to what the rest of the faculty are made. But Jefferson has made a generous estimate of what their practice is going to yield, way more than their practice does yield. And so in no time, they're complaining about the pay. And they go so far as to get a petition signed by the whole med school class saying, "Please give Dr. X a pay raise." And Jefferson stiffs them. So this is about 1822. About 1824, the two Richmond doctors resign and go back to Richmond and open their practices again. And Richmond at that point has 7 or 8 doctors, but they got something like 40,000 people living there, and they got the Tredegar Iron Works, and they got plants with machinery where people are going to get their elbow caught in the drive belt and stuff. Surgeons can make a living there, and doctors can make a living there, and they're good by the standards of the time. So in about a year, everybody is back to where they were 10 years earlier, okay? But they're not happy about it because Richmond still doesn't have a men's school. And what they would really like to have is a men's school in Richmond that could give MD degrees, and they could be the faculty, and they would do this in a nice hospital building where the building itself put people up while you did things to them. Well, okay. Spring of 1836, there is I won't say cocktail party, but it's not clear what the meeting was. But it was a meeting of people in the Richmond area who were doctors who might be interested in participating in the faculty on a med school basis. And somehow Draper, who had an MD, remember, from a very good med school, Draper heard about this. He may have been invited, but he at the very least heard about it. And he either took the coach from Keysville to Richmond, or he rode a horse 65 miles to get there, but he went to the meeting. And sure enough, the meeting was about setting up a med school, and interspersed with bitching about what Jefferson had done. And you didn't have to sing more than a couple of bars to this to Draper until he was outlining the way you can do this. This building was a hotel in Richmond that had gone broke. And I think this is because nobody travels, and so who's going to stay in the hotel? But that's a nice building, okay? It was available for a lease. You could make that a hospital with virtually no remodeling. I mean, you can do the big operations for the student body watch. You can do those in the party hall, and this works. And there are plenty of floors there with private rooms. This is really good. So they rent the Union Hotel. Well, sorry. He says you could rent the Union Hotel, and they say, yeah, okay, 6 doctors, good hospital once we get this equipped. What about the college? And Draper beams and says Hampden-Sydney would be glad to have this college operating on its own money. As the medical department of Hampden-Sydney College, we're chartered, and therefore you can give MD degrees, and we won't stand in the way. And they said, wow. So he comes back and goes to the board, and the board says, how much is this going to cost? And he said, they're going to pay all the money. And the board said, well, if we write that in, maybe. And so the board agreed to this. And in 1837, the medical department of Hampden-Sydney College opened, which was in effect just like the theological department of Hampden-Sydney College had been up to 1820 when they separated that off to be the seminary. And this was pretty good. And so they're attracting medical students because you can get an MD from the place. And it's 6 good doctors, including, interestingly enough, remember Bagby Hall up here? The grandfather of Bagby was one of the doctors who was in this group. But anyway, this went well, and apparently it did not involve Draper at all. He went home and taught chemistry and did research and things like that, but he was single-handedly responsible for getting all of this group together with all of this group and having the medical department. And this lasted until about the, about 1840. Come on. Okay. That's the Egyptian building, okay? The hospital was making so much money that the doctors who worked, all the money was flowing into their checkbook, okay? They took their own money and built a new building to replace the Union Hotel, which in the meantime they had bought. They sold it off, all right? But this building is still there and is still part of the Medical College of Virginia.
Right.
Why can I not? Oh, here we are. Modern picture of it. It's still on Broad Street. It's no longer has instruction, I think, but it's still very much the operations administration building and the VCU med school. And this turned into a good med school, although we'll have more about that in a few weeks. But they were, for example, the first med school in the South to have a hospital policy in which everybody got anesthesia. Very good news. In the meantime, while they were still attached to Hampden-Sydney, one of the doctors encountered a woman who had very severe cancer of the jaw, and she needed a seriously bad operation. And he set it up with all of the med students watching, and in 9 minutes, he took 2/3 of her jaw off, and she walked out of the operating room. Women had more stuff in those days. But anyway, they were on anesthetics pretty soon. And in the early 1850s, one of the original 6 doctors wanted to retire. He was losing, having trouble, and okay, time for me to get out. And the agreement with the college said that whenever there's a vacancy, the doctors who are there can nominate somebody for the vacancy. But the Hampden-Sydney Board of Trustees decides on the final appointment. And nobody thought that was funny until it happened. Because when it happened, the doctors in Richmond want to appoint good old Charlie, Mr. Number 7, who has not been, the money funnel has not been flowing into his pocket for 20 years, okay? And he's a great guy and we want to help him out. The Hampden-Sydney Board, they nominated. The Hampden-Sydney Board of Trustees said, well, no, we want to nominate this guy from Fredericksburg, who is a really, really good doctor. And the doctors in Richmond said, yeah, well, he's a really good doctor, but he's not the one we want. And there was a lawsuit. And in spite of the fact that in black and white it said Hampden-Sydney was going to win this, the med school won and in court. And that's where the Medical College of Virginia came from, with their man president, not ours. Didn't cost us anything to speak of. It was a useful thing for us to do societally, and it was a really great contribution of John William Draper.
Go on.
Okay. Second thing that Draper does that you maybe have heard about it gets to be 1839, and he's British, and so he loyally subscribes to the Proceedings of the Royal Society, because that's how you find out about chemical research that's going on. And in January of 1839, William Fox Talbot makes a presentation to the Royal Society of this really cool chemical thing he can do, which is with coated sheets of paper and stuff, he can produce an accurate black and white picture of people. He has invented standard silver negative photographic prints. The Royal Society puts this in the January issue, and by about March, and Draper's copy has gotten to him here, and he reads it and goes bonkers because he's been doing photochemistry, and he has all kinds of ideas about how to improve this process. So here we are in March-April of 1839, and if they had telephones, he got a phone call, okay? He gets a letter from NYU saying, "Good news, we finally got the money. When can you come?" And he said, "I'll be there for the start of the semester in September." Okay. All this time, his two sisters, one of the sisters seems not to have come to the U.S. I can't quite tell about that. Nobody talks about it. His mother had died, so it's down to him and two sisters, one older, one younger, I think. And the older one has pledged her intent to stay with him wherever he goes. If he's going to NYU, she'll move to New York too. She's going to stay with him. She'll be in, he's married. By the time he's here, he's married and has in 1839, he has a 2-year-old little boy. And she's busy nannying a little boy. And she says, I'll do this. Just give me a place to live and I'll do that. And I'll go ahead with painting and so on. And so they had an arrangement for one sister. The other sister is a little funky because she had not made any kind of pledge like that. And in the 3 years they'd been at Hampden-Sydney, she had married somebody. So she wasn't going to go anywhere. Now, let me ask you to look at that picture and tell me, how old is the woman in the picture? The two possibilities are 32 and 26. What's your vote?
46, 32. 26. 26.
People favor 26, it sounds like. 26 is the younger married sister, okay? I can identify that. I can't identify this picture, and what you're reading on there is not true. What happened is that he was going to leave, and in this one's case, he was not going to be back. He was not going to see her again. And he wanted, people always got little paintings done, well, I don't need a painting. There's this really cool thing I can do. And he takes this picture, which is a really, really good picture. In spite of what it says on there, it's not a daguerreotype. The daguerreotype was not made public until August of 1839. And when it came out, it took a 15-minute exposure. So nobody did daguerreotype portraits because the person doesn't live that can sit really still for 15 minutes. So this is a Talbot type silver negative. Talbot had not had much luck with this, but that's because he stumbled on it and was not very bright. Draper was bright, and he had made major improvements to Talbot type photography. And he kept this all his life as a memento without having her name on it. He knew who it was, and that's all that mattered. When he died in 1881, the 2-year-old, who had not, what's he know about this, is clearing out daddy's stuff. and he comes on this picture, which is dated. There's the date fall 1839 is written on the back, but nothing else. Boy thinks this is a photographic copy of a daguerreotype because it's such a good picture. It's not. I mean, Draper did do a lot of daguerreotype stuff, but later on, and he improved it, but the process by a number of people got improved. Daguerreotypes were so popular that by the time the Civil War started, New York City had 70 galleries that would take your picture, okay? and in every case, it was a daguerreotype. But I think this is the sister he was never going to see again, not the one who was going to go along with him and live with him her whole life and his whole life. Boy is trying to identify what this is, and he thinks it's a photographic copy of a daguerreotype. It's clearly a photograph, but he can't believe that this date is not a daguerreotype, when in fact it's not. It cannot have been. And so he writes this stuff down here, which is unfortunately not true. This is also not taken on top of the chemistry building at NYU. That's indoor lighting, not outdoor lighting. White walls are reflecting against this person. It's not a sunlight beam of light coming down from the northeast or something. And it's an indoor picture, which makes it even more difficult to get a daguerreotype up. But it wasn't taken on top of that building. It also wasn't taken on top of a building here. It was taken in the chemistry labs in the middle of Cushing Hall. Remember the picture of 1890s Cushing Hall with a yellow oval around the three windows in the middle? That was the chemistry lab. It had high ceilings. It faced south. You got great lighting, and I'm positive that's where this picture was taken. So anyway, the picture is famous because it's the first portrait of anybody, and it's, as photographs go, it's a pretty damn good picture, actually. It's a lot more like modern portraits than the Wright brothers' plane is like modern planes. But the other thing that Draper does that you need to know about is in 1842, he's well established at NYU, but he's got a summer to kill for some reason, and he comes back here. And what he's doing here is take one of these and hand them around. There's enough for everybody. What you're getting is a copy of one of the most important photographs in the world. 40 years ago, Oxford University Press brought this book out, which is the 100 most influential scientific photographs. This doesn't mean that they're great photographs, that they look neat. In fact, many of them look absolutely indecipherable. Thank you for passing those out. Many of them look undecipherable, but they did something to advance science significantly. They put the 100 photographs in, oh, okay, thank you. They put the 100 photographs in chronological order, which makes Draper, as you can imagine, first. And this, he took this picture, and this was a daguerreotype because daguerreotypes had intrinsically better resolution than silver negative Talbot type photographs. And about 1800, Fraunhofer had discovered that the sun's brilliant beam is actually only a few frequencies that are incredibly bright. And if you pass the light through a slit and then through a prism, you get there's a bright yellow light and a green light, and but there's only about, in the visible range, there's only about 3 of these frequencies that you get any light from. Why is that? That's weird. Well, nobody by definition has ever seen ultraviolet or infrared. That's why they're called ultra and infra. And so Draper knows that silver-based photography, and daguerreotypes are silver-based, it's just they work a completely different way. Silver-based photography is sensitive some distance out in the infrared and a long way out in ultraviolet. So he's going to set up to a slit and a prism and is going to get the sun's spectrum and take a picture of it. And in fact, the intensity is better for the ultraviolet. The infrared ones are kind of dim, so I'm going to do this several times at different exposures and try to get all of these. And sure enough, you can't see it on here because it's been reproduced too many times and it's too old, basically. But what he sees are about 20 bright lines when they had 3 or 4. And he also says, look, there's thousands of lines in there that are so dim I can't index them. But there's an incredible number of frequencies that are permitted, and in between them is forbidden, and we don't understand why that is. And basically, this is such a sensational result. He gets this picture here, and if you look up in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see the data for the photograph. July 27th, 1842, temperature 96 Fahrenheit. Thank you so much for global warming. Time occupied in exposure, 15 minutes. Latitude, 37 degrees, 10 minutes north. Now, that's not literally the latitude of Hampden-Sydney. It's the latitude would spot about halfway to Keysville. Okay, it's about 3 miles south of here. But he didn't really care about the latitude. He's recording it because this is the sun you're looking at, and there's a science, and you ought to put all the data down. But 37.1 is plenty good enough, okay? He cannot have been any place but here. And the only if you look at the 3710 parallel with good data through Southern Virginia, it does not pass through any cities or anything. It passes through, a little bit south of Worsham. And he has to have been here to visit the sister who still lived here that he had left behind 3 years ago. But boy who's with him is at this point only 5. He may have spent a nice summer here, but he's not going to remember any of it later. And so all of his comments on this, on Daddy's photograph, are him guessing reasonable things and guessing wrong. That picture is taken here. Furthermore, the woman who's in the picture is the one who's being visited when he takes a really sensational one. Because with all of these frequencies for solar emission, physicists decide that they have just got to understand why you get certain bright frequencies instead of a brilliant fuzzy glow, okay? And besides that, once you do know that, if you do understand why you get only certain frequencies, why is it these frequencies? I mean, you can measure these frequencies as 6 or 7 significant figures. Why? What's going on here? And physicists spent about a century after this came out working out a model for matter that would explain this the spectrum. And it's quantum mechanics, basically. And because they were focused so hard on atomic spectra, they got that explained first. But at that point, quantum mechanics was developed enough that we have to see where else this is going to go. But Hampden-Sydney, in a curiously passive way, was the birthplace of a century-long search for how quantum mechanics works. And nobody knows about Draper doing these things, nobody much, and nobody pays any attention to it. And you now represent everybody at Hampden-Sydney that knows about the famous picture. So anyway, next week is how to make money on the way to the Civil War, which costs you all your money. But anyway, thanks a lot. See you then.